Alright, well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and that means it's time for another Food for Thought Friday. Well, if you don't already know, I've got a passion for bridging the gap between scientific scholarly research, specifically in the behavioral sciences, and real-world, real-life practical application. And today, we are looking at change. To quote a famous folk singer, times they are a-changin'. And if you don't know what I mean, turn on the news, switch on the radio, or pick up a newspaper. Don't actually know if people read physical newspapers anymore, but you get the point. I once heard, once upon a time, that the only constant in organizational life is change. And I'm sure that we've all experienced some organizational change in our professional lives at some point or another. And sometimes change goes really well, and at other times change goes tragically bad. The question might be, what factors support well-executed organizational change, and which factors, if absent, undermine effective organizational change initiatives? And today, we're going to review John Kotter's 8-step process for change, and you can check this book out yourself. It's a great book, Leading Change by John Kotter. Now, Kotter has indicated that before people will readily accept change, leaders must, 1, create a sense of urgency. In other words, answer the question, why now? 2, build a guiding coalition. In other words, build buy-in in early and create change champions. Number 3, clearly articulate the desired and intended outcome. Those are the first steps, according to John Kotter. Kurt Lewin, who's another well-known organizational psychologist, refers to this as the unfreezing step of change management. People are generally frozen in the status quo, and they need to be unstuck. And there's a common idea regarding unsticking people, and it is that people are generally resistant to change. However, organizational consultant Alan Weiss would tend to disagree. Reading from Organizational Change, it's a hefty one right here. Weiss addresses this in his chapter, and I'm going to read a brief excerpt for you. And it says, quote, "There's a generally accepted myth that holds that people resist change. I found that to be totally untrue. Every day, people adapt to, adjust for, and anticipate change in the form of road closures, surprises from their family, either good or bad, organizational shifting priorities, cancellations, abrupt requests, and so on. If people were reluctant to change, we'd all be on heavy medication." All right, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, and I kind of like the tone. That's his brand of humor. He carries on to say, change is the universal norm. It is both omnipresent, that means everywhere, and accepted. What people do resist, however, is ambiguity. Some change does not involve ambiguity, such as a highway detour that puts us on a familiar, though less traveled street, or a work shift that involves a sudden trip, but to a site often visited. Often change produces significant ambiguities. A road detour that takes one to a completely unfamiliar territory, or a sudden trip to a new country, a new client, or even a new problem. In organizational change work, most people can relate to the picture painted of the future organization, and all people are intimately familiar with where they are today, but the journey to that new future is likely to be highly ambiguous and unclear. And that last line from Alan Weiss is really the critical piece. It's the key. Because that ambiguity, that uncertainty of where we are and where we are going, this is what often prevents effective change. Weiss advises that organizational change agents, quote, work with your client to establish not only the future state desired, but also the details of the journey. Who, what, where, when, why. We'll talk about that maybe in another video. For example, delineate the details of the transition, the number of people affected, what the universe of stakeholders looks like, likely obstacles, and so on. You'll find that the implementers are far more comfortable following a game plan and even deviating from it if necessary when there's a game plan than proceeding with no game plan at all. Right, so that's Cotter's model in action. Create a sense of urgency, create a guiding coalition, develop a vision and a strategy, communicate the change vision. Now, Lewin follows up with his step of unfreezing. He follows it up with his step 2, which is to actually make the change. So Lewin says there's 3 steps: unstick, change, restick. Okay, and that's to solidify or to normalize the new reality. Cotter follows the same logic in his steps 4 through 8 in his model. Step 5 through 8. Step 5 would be empower employees for broad action. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. 6, according to Cotter, generate short-term wins. 7, consolidate gains and produce more change. And 8, anchor new approaches in the culture. So there we go. Whatever change you're experiencing today, start by asking these 3 questions. Do I understand why this is taking place now? And if you're the change agent, ask yourself, have you clarified the sense of urgency? Number 2, are there others like me who agree with this change? And if you're the change agent, have you intentionally identified and gained buy-in from a group of change champions? Number 3, question to ask yourself, do you know what the new reality looks like? And as the change agent, have you clearly painted a picture of the preferred future and answered the critical question for stakeholders, what's in it for me? Or as I more poignantly like to say a little bit, on the nose, what's changing and why should I care? I mean, that's what it boils down to for critical stakeholders. Tell me what's changing and why is this important to me? Why should I care? Next question to ask is, have you identified structural or systemic barriers to your success? Have you addressed these with your leader if you are being affected by the change? And if you're the change agent, have you anticipated these barriers? Now, I have found in my own organizational change work that running a controlled small-scale pilot launch, or in other words, a small-scale soft launch, works perfectly to answer this call. We'll look at that a little bit more in a second. Okay. Have you scaffolded the change process in order to generate quick and early wins to gain buy-in momentum? Now, several years ago, I played a key role in another position as we implemented a new piece of technology enterprise-wide, and we did just that. We created a small-scale, low-risk impact pilot and a soft launch to roll out the new technology, and this helped us to capture early wins and gain excitement and success momentum. Okay, success breeds success. So you build success momentum, and this made all the difference when we then scaled the change later on. Finally, last question to stop and ponder. Have you addressed any systemic issues that will undermine the long-term adoption and sustainability? Here's what it is. Here's what it boils down to. The best planned, most evidence-based interventions often fall flat and fail when we fail to gain critical stakeholder buy-in from the start. We end up with a united consensus around the boardroom and zero follow-through and support post-implementation. So a quick recap here on organizational change. The leadership question really isn't, why are people resisting? The leadership question really is, what ambiguity have I left unresolved? And that can be at each of those stages. And again, that's taken from organizational development. It's quite a hefty book. Pick it up. I highly recommend that you do. You'll probably be reading it for the next, 365 days if you actually want a page through page 5. It's hefty. But there we are. Love it, hate it, agree, disagree, or somewhere in between. I hope at very least this has been food for thought. And I hope it helps. Follow me for more.